Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we're back in our episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have what Spirit Airlines and Signals for Financial Services from Cato.org, posted by Giant Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I think the Libertarian position is that the government is primarily the one to blame for Spirit Airlines for going bankrupt and folding. Personally, there are two things I would really blame here: that they blocked the merger with JetBlue in 2024, I think it was. Because if they were allowed to merge, maybe they would still be around today. And also the high gas prices from the Iran war certainly don't help. And I think that's, ultimately, I think that's important to remember. The government is oftentimes going to be the one for the reason why a lot of companies go out of business. Of course, Reddit's all about, it's just gas from the Iran war, while ignoring that Elizabeth Warren was one of the key architects that they couldn't merge with JetBlue in the first place. So people always blame the opposing team for why bad things happen rather than their own team. But both of them I would say are to blame here, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, can we ever trust the government to be honest about war, from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't know if we can ever trust the government to be honest about anything. The government is full of self-serving individuals. They're going to say whatever serves them best. And that's important to remember as well. People are always going to act in their own self-interest, and that includes the state. And that's my thoughts there. Next we have an obituary for the War Powers resolution from Cato.org, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I think it's sad that, it's not going to pass. But, ultimately, I don't think it matters if it did pass. The government's still going to justify whatever it wants to justify. If the executive branch wants to justify going around the judicial branch and the legislative branch, personally, I don't really care for it. But a lot of people do defer to whatever the president says. And that's ultimately how power works. Power works, whatever the person in authority says. And a lot of people are going to defer to the president in matters of governmental authority. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, when you think of it, we shouldn't even have an election, from nytimes.com, posted by Donald Key. And yeah, that's just Donald Trump saying something, to get people riled up. When he says it the first time, I think it's a little okay to be riled up, to be a little concerned about it. But when he says it for the 1000th time, eventually you just get numb to it. It's like all the time he posts bait on social media. When he does it the first time, it's concerning. But when he does it the 1000th time, it's just pretty par for the course. Next we have, Republicans unveil $72 billion package for ICE, Trump's ballroom, from HuffPost.com, posted by Woke Boogeyman. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. But ultimately, if the government wants to spend $72 billion on ICE and Trump's ballroom, the government can throw money at whatever it wants to throw money at. Oftentimes, there's nothing you can do about it. Next, we have, the UK wants adults to call the police on toddlers, from Telegraph.co.uk, posted by Mazda Prophet. And yeah, personally, I don't think adults should be calling the police on toddlers, but, ultimately, if people want to call the police on whoever they call the police on, they should be able to. People are going to justify what they justify. I personally, don't really call the police unless it's an emergency, but ultimately, if you want to call the police wherever you want to call the police, that's fine. Just don't use them to take down your political enemies and all that, because the police are inherently inherently the state, and I don't think that's very good. I think the libertarian position regarding policing is, we need private police rather than public police, because private police, at the very least, wouldn't be controlled by the state, and it's legal monopoly on the use of force. Next we have, by one vote, 101 to 100, Pennsylvania Democrats passed bill blocking whites-only town with no support from Republicans. After a whites-only organization about plans to establish a settlement in Pennsylvania, state Democrats put their foot down, posted by Woke Boogeyman, and that's cross-post from the Black People of Reddit subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, if people do want to have a whites-only community, or a blacks-only community, or an Asians-only community, etc., they should be able to. So I personally would agree with more of the Republicans here than the Democrats who voted to stop it. If people, I won't personally want to live in a whites-only community, but I think if people do want to live in a whites-only community, they should be able to, and the state shouldn't be telling them what they can and can't do. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Trump's responses to Kimmel and Comey highlight his contempt for freedom of speech, from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for Trump's, anti-free speech, but I like what Noam Sane said here in the comments, suddenly the libs care about freedom of speech. The same people who ban all opposing thought as Reddit moderators or admins. Trump also enjoys that freedom is free to say just as much as these people suck, how they should be fired, or in the case of Comey, to fire his subordinate. No law was suddenly created that says you can't make fun of Trump. You may now return to your feigned outrage and invented problems already in progress. And they posted an image link of the SPLC putting up a bunch of, they were funding all the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazi groups, even though they were against them. Because the amount of hate the amount of hate needed is they need you have the much more out of supply than you think, so they need to astroturf it themselves. And yeah, personally, I would agree with what they said. But neither side really cares about freedom of speech. But of course, Reddit, it's hypocritical when they cry, "Oh, Trump doesn't care about freedom of speech." Because they really don't care about freedom of speech. They want to make anything they deem to be misinformation or hate speech illegal. I think that's important to remember as well. Hell, this subreddit's had me banned for almost 2 years now, and where's my freedom of speech? They'll say, "Oh, you broke the Reddit rules," even though I still am allowed to have my Reddit account as well. I just can't be on this subreddit. And it just goes to show you these people are hypocritical. They'll ban you for any dissent whatsoever, although crying Trump's a fascist. Personally, I do think, Trump, the FCC shouldn't be pressuring Kimmel off the air. Trump shouldn't really care about Kimmel or Comey for that matter. He should let them fall into the irrelevant hacks that they are. If Kimmel wants to say whatever outrageous thing he wants to say on TV, I think libertarian positions let him say that. But the only reason Kimmel's relevant at all these days, Comey as well, is that Trump can't stop talking about them himself. If he just ignored them, they'd go the way of the dinosaur, and Kimmel would be off the air, and Comey would be the irrelevant hack that he is. And I think that's important to remember as well. Trump doesn't care about free speech, but I think libertarian positions, you can't have the FCC go after political enemies in the case of Kimmel or whatever, who's ever after Comey as well. People should be able to say whatever they want to. It might not be good, like a lot of what Kimmel says is just Reddit tier circle jerking, but ultimately his ratings were enough to cancel him, I would say, and force him off the air. But Trump is pretty much the only reason he gets any attention or ratings at all these days, and if he just ignored him, the problem would sort itself out. Let him and the rest of the late night talk show hosts who do nothing but jerk themselves off die in their relevance as people increasingly move on to social media and streaming. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, I'm hopeful the president of Gays for Trump speaks out, watch, from unclosetedmedia.com, posted by Neat Concussions, and they said, Peter Boykin founded Gays for Trump 10 years ago as an organization to get out to vote for gay Trump supporters during the president's first run for office. The organization grew fast by running Facebook campaigns and hosting events as the Republican National Convention. Now, over 1 year into Trump's second term, Boykin's group is smaller but still boasts 11,000 members. In the episode of Uncloseted with Spencer McNaughton, Spencer sits down with Boykin to learn about why he remains hopeful for Donald Trump despite his disagreements on how the president has been handling LGBTQ issues. Spencer, I talked to you over a year ago today, shortly after Trump was elected for his second term, and you were optimistic and excited about him taking the reins for a second time. We're a year out now. How do you think he's doing? Let's see, Peter. Well, first of all, I'm saying that you got a lot of slack for talking to me, so thank you for actually talking to me. But I think it helped a lot. But I think we're doing pretty good. I'm over for Donald Trump. As Donald Trump, I'm still worried a lot of the Republicans, some of the people in his cabinet, not the gay members per se, but or people like Hegseth and Everett not really satisfied with. Spencer, I'm interesting to say you're still over for Trump. Me and him and his administration last year, they've waged unprecedented, relentless attacks against the LGBTQ community. They've slashed HIV and AIDS funding and funding for many other LGBTQ healthcare politicians. Issues, raised mentions of transgender people, and the people he's surrounded with aren't just anti-trans, they're aggressively anti-LGBTQ. How do you swear that way by saying you're so despite all he's done? And Peter responds, well, I'll tell you, first of all, a lot of people that he's surrounding himself with, the gay members, are a lot of log cabin type people, and if you've done the research on log cabin, they do include the LGBTQ, possibly Q. As for Trump, unfortunately, he's got a lot of fish to fry, and there's other members, unfortunately, they've taken back over, the evangelical Christians, for one, love to take over our groups and good ideas, and I feel like they've kind of weaseled their way back to him. Unfortunately, I don't see a good future for the Republican Party as they continue down that road, so I'm not optimistic on the future of the Republican Party. I'm only going to be optimistic about Donald Trump's doing when it's not regarding the gay community. I can also say that a lot of these, if you break it down, it just seems to be attacks on the trans community per se. I'm not exactly happy with that, but I know a lot of the gays who take it up for it, but it's usually the trans community that we've seen different rules and laws of things happen. And again, I'm not exactly happy on those issues. It's again not the same Trump that we had before, but it's a different ballgame. I guess that's how politics are, unfortunately. And yeah, I'm glad that, Uncloseted Media tends to be one of the more woke outlets, I would say. But I'm glad they're interviewing a more gay conservative here because, it's always important to interview people, who might not agree with you 24/7. You always have to engage with people who might have different opinions on you, even if you are part of some of the same groups. I think that's important to remember as well. Personally, Trump's market is very anti-LGBTQ, but, he does have some voices in it that I would say are anti-LGBTQ talking to him, but he does have some others pro-LGBTQ talking to him as well, like this guy, yes, and Scott Presler is another one who's really the guy who really drives up a lot of Republican voter registration in states like Pennsylvania. He's gay too, and I think that's important to remember. Ultimately, if I think the libertarian position is, the state just needs to leave LGBTQ people alone as long as you're not hurting anyone else. I think that's important to remember as well. But increasingly, a lot of members of the LGBTQ community want to use the state to enforce their agendas. I think that's important to remember as well. You shouldn't be allowing the state to enforce your agenda. That's inherently anti-libertarian. And I think that, if you want to go about your own agenda, that's fine. But when you use the state to enforce it, that's not libertarian, I would say. And yeah, personally, a lot of people they think Trump's anti-gay or whatever, but he did recognize, he was the first president to recognize same-sex marriage heading into his first term in office. I think that's important to remember as well. But I don't think it really matters. I think the whole LGBTQ circle jerk is just a wedge issue that they can divide people on when in reality the Uniparty agrees on like 95% of topics. But they use the wedge issues like LGBTQ or abortion or civil or BLM to divide people. Well, in reality, they pretty much agree on everything behind the curtain, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump's chief economic advisor boasts that people are surviving on credit cards right now. Has it on American consumers. Credit card spending is through the roof. They're spending more on gasoline, but they're spending more on everything else too. Posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the underreported news subreddit. And that's like a clip, I guess, of the guy saying that on Fox Business Channel. And yeah, personally, if he wants to say that, I think he should be able to. But it's not something I would take pride in. It's just gonna lead to the Democrats taking back power, and then they'll say stupid stuff like this when they're in power, and the cycle will keep repeating forever. It's just gonna have the Uniparty going back and forth in power forever, all while nothing really changes. They might say some good stuff on the campaign trail, but they'll get into office, and it'll just be the status quo. Obama said his whole campaign in 2008 was changed, and he didn't really end up changing anything. And Trump said, I'm going to shake things up. When he ran in 2016, he didn't really end up shaking things up, despite what the media, the legacy media and social media might have you believe. And, it just goes to show you, it's all just basically professional wrestling. It's all just kebab. It's not real. If voting really mattered, they wouldn't let us do it. Next, we have surveillance tools intended for border control being used against Americans from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but if you don't think the government's spying on you, at least to some extent, you're being naive, and the government's going to use whatever tools it has at its disposal to do so, even if they're intended for another purpose. And that's my thoughts there. Next, we have Iran's nuclear facilities have been obliterated from WhiteHouse.gov, posted by Ninja Lover, and that was for a White House press release from June 25th, 2025, about a year ago, and they OP added a little friendly reminder. And yeah, personally, it just goes to show you that the government can say anything, and ultimately, it doesn't make it true. They said Iran was finished a year ago, and now they're still bombing Iran, and it just goes to show you that just because the government says something doesn't necessarily make it true. If they want to say Iran's nuclear facilities have been obliterated, they should be able to, but that doesn't necessarily make it true. Next, we have Republicans want to borrow every single dollar of the $72 billion bill to fund ICE in Trump's ballroom from Reason.com, posted by Jai Porcupine. And yeah, personally, I don't care for that, but as I said earlier, the state can throw money at whatever it wants to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. Next, we have testing out RCV versus Star voting methods in the California governor's race, posted by JStocksQQQ, and they said, calling all Californians, want to try our Star voting versus ranked voting in the poll for California governor? Please participate and share. It is a great way to try out and compare different voting methods. Will Star voting help liberty-minded candidates? and they link to the page from bettervoting.com. Yeah, personally, I don't think the system of voting really matters. If voting really mattered at all, they wouldn't let us do it, and I think that's what the libertarian position on voting should be. Voting is inherently forced collectivism. If you want to have voting in a voluntary collectivism, that's fine. When it comes to forced collective, like a national government like the U.S., I personally don't think voting is going to be that libertarian, and that's my thoughts there. Next, we have Republicans fall 1 vote short on bill to criminalize blowing whistles to warn of ICE from azmeter.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I think, if you want to blow the whistle whenever you feel like, I think you should be able to. Ultimately, the state can criminalize whatever it wants to criminalize, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. But yeah, I'm glad that they didn't criminalize blowing whistles to warn of ICE. I think libertarian position is, I don't really care for ICE. But, if you want to blow the whistle and try and prevent them from doing their job, I think you should be able to. But with that being said, don't be surprised if you're on top of them 24/7 that they eventually might snap and end up hurting you, like what happened to Alex Preddy and Renee Good for that matter. I think it's interesting. A lot of writers say ICE is the Gestapo, yet they say get on top of ICE and annoy them as much as possible. Personally, I don't really care for the Gestapo or ICE for that matter, but I think with both groups you shouldn't be trying to agitate them as much as possible. That's just the recipe for disaster. Next, we have Meta suggests total shutdown in New Mexico from Coat.com, posted by Ragnar OKXG. And yeah, personally, if Meta wants to shut down its operations in New Mexico, I think that they should be able to. I think, companies should be able to work wherever they feel like. I don't know why they're going to shut down their base in New Mexico, and I don't really care for their reasons. I don't really know what their reasons are for that matter, but ultimately, if they don't want to work in New Mexico for whatever reason, they should be able to. Companies should be able to work in whatever markets they want to and serve whatever markets they want to. That's how the free market works. Serve whatever markets you want to, regardless of where they are or what country they're in. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have, looks like that's it, but I had a post from the Libertarian Party USA subreddit that I wanted to share as well. Since the national convention is later this month, who are you guys supporting for chair of the LP? And I said, a post on about the Libertarian Party in this subreddit, definitely out of the ordinary, no. Steve Nicalia, the incumbent chair, is not seeking re-election. Wikipedia lists 4 candidates to replace him. Wes Benedict, former executive director of the Libertarian National Committee. Evan McMahon, chair of the Libertarian Party of Indiana. Robbie Yates, candidate for the Charlotte mayoral elections 2025 and 2013. Jim Ostrowski, alternative libertarian activist. I'm not too familiar with any of them, but maybe you guys are. As long as it's not this guy, I'll be fine. I'll link to a tweet from Jeremy Kaufman, who tweeted, I've decided to run for chair of the Libertarian Party. My platform is simple. I would dissolve the Libertarian Party and apologize to the American people for wasting their time, money, and energy. And I added thoughts. And yeah, personally, and then I add in the comments, between Israel, Epstein, and Kaufman, is any wonder why anti-Semitism is increasing? Hope the feds don't arrest me for noticing. If Kaufman dissolves the LP, we would create a new one with somehow even more autism. And so, yeah, personally, if, ultimately, I don't think it really matters who wins. The Libertarian Party is just kind of an irrelevant third party in the grand scheme of things. Maybe Kaufman will win and dissolve the party, but then in which case, a new Libertarian Party will arise, which would somehow be even more autistic and out there than the current one, which is saying something. I personally don't think I could run for chair of the LP. I think I'm too libertarian when it comes to telling people what to do. And I know the red short maybe, you run for public office or might do something in the future. That's because the state is inherently forced collectivism. I want to end that from within and got to the Libertarian Party, which is voluntary collectivism. And let's see if there's anything new on the Uncensored subreddits. Looks like there's nothing new, so we're going to wrap up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.